Mount Everest. You already know it's the tallest mountain in the world, and you probably know that it's one of the deadliest too. But what if I told you it's not for the reason you think? Everest has a secret, a dark secret, and I'm going to reveal it to you. The deadliest thing on Everest isn't the cold or the storms. The year is 1924, long before Gore-Tex, before insulated boots, before anyone had proof that a human being could survive the roof of the world. Two men set on a journey with possibly no return. Their names were George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irving. One, a seasoned climber, the other, a brilliant young engineer. Both men roped together like two halves of the same impossible dream. They were last seen on June 8th. A teammate spotted them for just a fleeting moment. Two tiny black silhouettes clawing their way up Everest's final ridge. And here's the part that haunts mountaineering history. They weren't miles away. They weren't hopelessly lost. They were less than 800 vertical feet from the summit. 800 feet. Then the clouds swallowed them whole. For 75 years, no one knew if they had turned back, or if they had stood on top of the world 3 decades before anyone else. Their story became Everest's greatest riddle. Were they the first to conquer the mountain, or the mountain's most tragic almost? The expedition was Mallory's 3rd time on Everest. This time, failure wasn't an option. He had a country behind him. An empire was waiting. But there was more. There was something inside Mallory that was driving him. The same thing that would drive thousands more to risk their lives in the decades to come. Something dark. Something difficult to put into words. A madness. A fever. Mallory knew very well when he set off with his team in 1924 that he might not make it home to his wife and 3 young children. From the 1921 reconnaissance, they understood Everest could only be climbed in stages. Camps would be established as the men acclimatized to the thinning air. They mapped the surroundings, studied lethal weather, and returned home with an answer the world craved. Yes, summiting Everest was possible. What divided them was oxygen. The cast iron cylinders weighed 30 to 35 pounds per set, and that slows you down. And the brain, starved of oxygen, can do terrible things. It starts with headaches and sickness. The higher you go, cells start dying. The brain swells, the lungs fill with fluid. When it's bad, you might start to see things, hear things, and your judgment goes. In 1922, their first summit attempt ended in tragedy. After the long approach through Tibet, they climbed the north face, cutting steps above camps 5 and 6 into what would later be called the death zone, where the body is already dying and anything can kill you. Twice they tried for the summit, and twice they were turned back. Still nearly 2,000 feet above and guarded by steep, broken steps of ice and rock, the summit remained out of reach. On their 3rd attempt for the summit, Mallory and his climbing group were hit by an avalanche, a sharp crack like an explosion. Snow surged downward. Men were thrown off their feet. Ropes snapped tight across their bodies. It was over in seconds. 7 porters were not going home to their families. It was a disaster. One that weighed heavily on Mallory's mind when he was one of 13 British climbers who left the safety of England in 1924 to try again. Around 60 Tibetan porters were hired. A handful would climb above 26,000 feet, men who had little climbing experience and lacked even basic protective clothing. The clock was ticking. The Empire wanted these men to succeed. It needed them to succeed. But on Everest, anything can happen, and it often does. The climbers visited Rongbuk Monastery, where they asked the Lama for his blessing. He gave it, but he also issued a stern warning. This expedition would not end without death. Mallory's climbing partner, Andrew Sandy Irving, was just 22. He had next to zero experience climbing on ice. What he did know was machinery. Irving was a gifted engineer, brought along not just for his fitness, but to modify and maintain the oxygen rigs, which were now lighter and more reliable. Joining them were Edward Norton and T.H. Somervell, Noel Odell, and Captain Jeffrey Bruce, all veterans of World War I, all exceptional mountaineers. If Everest was gonna be defeated, no one in the world stood a better chance than these men. The expedition advanced smoothly to base camp. Everything went almost exactly as planned. For once. The mountain seemed cooperative. But on Everest, fortunes change in the blink of an eye. As the camps went up, the mountain was thinning the field. Captain Bruce fell seriously ill, battling constant blizzards, sickness, and frostbite. In the coldest temperatures the men had ever known, the first one to die was a porter, pneumonia, and then another, cerebral hemorrhage. Others were sick and frostbitten. Some of the porters refused to go on. By the third week on the mountain, Everest stopped being a challenge and started behaving like a countdown. And it was only going to get worse. Each retreat cost them something they couldn't replace: oxygen, time, provisions. The mountain wasn't just blocking progress, it was draining the energy of the expedition members. By June, they had to make a decision. There would be no perfect window, no second chances or missed opportunities. They either climbed now, in conditions no one considered safe, or the expedition was over. That's when Mallory made the call. He would go with Irving. He told Norton that he and Irving would make the final attempt. They'd use oxygen, but sparingly, enough to help, not enough to weigh them down too much. If anyone had earned a chance at the summit, it was Mallory. He was the only man who had been on all 3 British expeditions. He deserved a place in the history books, and he would get it, but not for the reasons he thought. Before they left Camp 6, Odell took a photograph. It would be the last ever taken of Mallory and Irving alive. They stood in front of their flimsy cloth tents, woolen hats pulled low, eyes covered with goggles. They turned toward the mountain and disappeared into the wind. Both were using oxygen. Both appeared to be in good condition, but the timing was off. For some reason, the men had set off late that morning, a mystery that would take years to solve. By the 9th, they hadn't returned. Odell and several porters struggled back up to Camp 6, and still there was no sign of the missing men. Magnesium flares were lit into the darkness. Odell waited. What chance did those 2 men have out there alone in the open when Odell could barely endure a few minutes exposed to the elements? By June 11th, Odell laid blankets out in the snow in the shape of a cross, a final signal to those below. No trace can be found. Given up hope, awaiting orders, Camps 3 and below were evacuated. The higher camps abandoned completely. Mallory and Irving were almost certainly dead. But had they made it to the top? Had they died not on the way up but the way down? If they had, Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay's summit of Everest in 1953 was not the first time men had defeated the mountain. Odell had to tell his story over and over. He saw it, a black dot silhouetted on a small snow crest beneath a rock step. Another dot appeared, Mallory and Irving. In a flash, clouds swallowed them again. They were so close, but time was against them. They might have reached the peak, but the sad fact was, their bodies lay somewhere on that mountain. Finding them would offer clues to whether they'd summited. Despite the dangers, the urge to summit Everest would become an obsession for climbers of the future, for professionals, for amateurs, for people who could barely explain why they felt the need to stand on top of the world. What was driving them to do it? The British tried several times to summit from the Tibet side after the Mallory expeditions, and each time they failed. When Everest was officially conquered in 1953, Norgay and New Zealander Hillary summited the South Col route, the Nepal side, with a British-led expedition. Since Hillary and Norgay's summit, nearly 12,900 climbers have reached Everest's top, over 9,100 from the south, nearly 3,700 from the north. But the numbers carry a warning. At least 334 never made it home. Most of them died on the descent. A small number, but one with a dark reality. People still climb Everest, and people still die. Their bodies buried on the mountain. And if you die there, you're probably staying. 200 to 300 bodies are still on the mountain, frozen in time. A warning preserved like monuments of endurance, of recklessness, or of sheer bad luck. There's Green Boots, the body of a man huddled into a cave on the north face, about 1,100 feet below the summit. He's now a grim reminder that scaling the world's highest mountain isn't a hobby, it's an obsession. At that height, it's almost impossible to retrieve the body. The best you can hope for is being hidden from sight. Like Sleeping Beauty, Frances Arcentiev, the first American woman in history to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. She collapsed during the descent, When climbers saw her the next day, she was sitting in the snow, badly frostbitten. Teams passed her on the way up. They didn't stop. Arsenyev herself should have turned back, but like many who would die on Everest, an irresistible force to succeed clouded her judgment. The next day, she was still there. A team unselfishly gave up their own summit attempt to try and help her, but she died in the same spot, lying on her side on the southeast ridge. Her husband had already gone in search of her. He never came back either. There are hundreds of them, men and women in their frozen graves, most of them in the death zone. Many die on the Lhotse face, an extremely dangerous wall of ice on the South Col route. Others succumb on the Hillary Step, an almost vertical 40-foot rock face right before the summit. Everest is a place where death stalks climbers. But each year, the masses return to the mountain, laughing and joking at base camp, telling each other stories, knowing full well that some of them won't be going home. But in recent years, Everest has changed. The mystery was gone. The routes were fixed. The dangers were documented, measured, mapped, and priced. And yet, it had never been more deadly. This time, the killer wasn't avalanches. It wasn't falls. It wasn't storms rolling in unexpectedly. It was traffic. In May of 2019, a rare window of perfect weather opened over Everest. Blue skies, low winds, the kind of conditions climbers wait weeks for. And everyone wanted to reach the summit. On the South Col route, climbers funneled upward through a geography that doesn't allow hesitation. The Lhotse face up the South Col toward the narrow summit ridge leading to the Hillary Step. And this is where Everest turns into a bottleneck. There is only one way up and only one way down. And in the death zone, timing is everything. At that altitude, the human body is dying by the minute. Judgment fades, muscles weaken. Every delay burns through oxygen that cannot be replaced. And in 2019, climbers didn't just slow down, they stopped completely. Photographs from that day show a line of people stretching across the summit ridge. Dozens of climbers standing shoulder to shoulder waiting their turn to climb the last few meters. Some waited for hours. Above them, the summit. Below them, a drop that falls away into nothing. They stood there burning oxygen, freezing in place, trapped by the very dream they'd paid everything to reach. Because this wasn't just ambition anymore, it was business. Everest had become an industry. Permits were expensive. Guided climbs cost tens of thousands of dollars. Sherpa teams were paid per summit success. Expedition companies competed for clients. Governments depended on permit revenue. Turning back meant refunds. Turning back meant failure. So people kept going, even when they shouldn't have. That season alone, 11 climbers died. Most of them didn't fall. Most of them weren't buried by snow. They just ran out of oxygen. They collapsed from exhaustion. They sat down and never got up again. Some died just meters from safety after summiting successfully, because the mountain doesn't care if you reach the top. Everest kills most people on the way down. And in 2019, the Qs turned descent into a death sentence. 100 years after Mallory vanished into the clouds, the same force was still at work. The pressure to keep going. Everest doesn't just attract obsession anymore, it rewards it. And now, here is where we get to the darkest idea. That people pursue the peak no matter what, even if it means walking past stranded people and leaving them for dead. The British climber David Sharp was an experienced mountaineer. He wasn't paying tens of thousands of dollars to be effectively pushed up the mountain by a team of Sherpas. The $6,200 he paid in 2006 was about as cheap as Everest can get. He planned to summit alone. His missing toes from previous climbs weren't an impediment. They just made his drive stronger. If he didn't do it this time, he wasn't going to try again. And he was a purist. That meant no supplemental oxygen. It was his ultimate downfall. He summited, but like so many before him, he didn't have enough left in him to make it back down. He was seen by dozens of climbers, huddled inside Green Boots Cave, barely moving. That day, dozens of climbers passed him. Some asked him questions. Was he resting? Was he dead? But they climbed on, reaching the summit. Then they passed him again on the descent hours later. David sat there throughout the whole night. his body freezing, his brain starved of oxygen. He was still there, still alive, when a group of climbers passed him on the ascent in the early morning the next day. And he could talk. "My name is David Sharp. I'm with Asian Trekking, and I just want to sleep." And so he slept and never woke up again. What if someone had actually stopped and offered assistance the first time he was seen? Would he have survived? Many who have been passed on the mountain were already beyond rescue, unconscious, extremely frostbitten, their bodies shutting down. On Everest, you can't carry people. Even attempting it puts your life in danger. You can offer oxygen, adjust a mask, help someone sit or stand, but above a certain height, even those acts can be fatal. "Save me." The last words of Shreya Shah Chlorfine, a Nepalese-Canadian woman who died on Everest in 2012. She wasn't trapped in a historic traffic jam like the climbers of 2019. It came from being pushed onto Everest by expectations she couldn't meet. Her death revealed something else: how the pressure to summit reaches people who were never truly ready to be there. She did reach the summit, and then on the descent, she began to fail high on the South Col route. She'd paid a fortune by the time everything was counted, reportedly close to $100,000 all in. She wasn't a strong climber. Some would call her a tourist. People said she never should have been there. The leader of the company who'd taken her up the mountain told her not to try to summit that day. He'd warned her she wasn't fit enough. And after she died, another debate spread through the climbing world. Did she have enough bottled oxygen to get back down? What drove her upward wasn't just ambition, it was pressure, expectations. The same drive for status pushed Mallory and Irving into the death zone way too late in the day. Something inside drove them on, the need to say, "I did it, and I did it first." Had they made it to the top? The answer surely lay in the bodies. 1999, the Mallory and Irving research expedition pushes on up the mountain. They're guided by data, by the discovery of a 1920s oxygen canister, an ice axe, and reports from Chinese climbers that the dead Englishman had been seen back in the 60s and 70s, crunching over the ice. They found him. At almost 26,800 feet, his body well preserved by the cold, pecked at by birds, and his skin bleached. A treasure trove of clues to the puzzle of whether he'd once stood on top of the mountain. His shirt bore the name, G. Mallory. His goggles were tucked into his pocket, a detail that suggested he had fallen while descending in fading light or darkness. Darkness that meant he might have been coming down the mountain after his summit. He was discovered far below the ridge, and well below the point where Odell had last seen him and Irving moving strongly. The evidence pointed toward a fatal fall on the descent. Mallory had borrowed a Kodak vest pocket camera from Somerville. Irving had explicitly mentioned it in notes left at camp. It wasn't found on Mallory's body, so it had to be with Irving. If either man had reached the summit, they almost certainly would have taken photographs. Even after decades locked in ice, the film might still be readable. To finally unlock the mystery, it was a matter of finding Irving and that camera. But could someone have moved him? Could someone have taken the camera? Why wasn't he close to Mallory? Mallory's body still had a rope attached, suggesting a fall while roped to Irving. There was a heavy blow to the forehead, but likely not fatal. He had a broken leg, broken ribs, a dislocated elbow, and bruising. Exhausted, freezing, half-blind, and in agony, he might have just collapsed in the snow. But did he die knowing he'd achieved the impossible? Mallory's daughter thought so. She revealed that her father always carried a photograph of his wife, Ruth. Every climb, it was secured in his pocket. He was going to plant it on the top. When his body was found, the photo was missing, but his clothing and many personal items were intact. If he hadn't reached the summit, he'd have still had that photo. The deputy leader of a Chinese expedition, Su Jing, was asked about Mallory and Irving many years after he'd summited. He admitted he'd been coming down the first step when he saw a dead man lying on his back. His feet were pointing uphill, his body wedged into a rock, cocooned in a sleeping bag. That had to be Irving. That means he should still be up there now, almost perfectly preserved. The theory was that the rope still attached to Mallory might have snapped on a rock. Mallory was badly injured, and Irving decided to bivouac for the night, and he then died in his sleep. In 2024, they found him. Well, they found his foot, encased in a climbing boot and sock. The sock bore his name written on a label stitched to it. It looked like it had been carried by a glacier because it was about 7,000 feet from where Mallory had been discovered. Where was the rest of him? And where was the camera? To this day, the mystery remains unsolved, but Irving is still out there, frozen in time with an old camera stuffed into his jacket. The camera might rewrite history, but the real story has never changed. Everest doesn't kill you. The need to say I did it does. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.